Aldo said, no, Eleanor, he has had a hit. They're both dead. Oh, I just couldn't get over it.
The bullet would have entered the jaw, just below the jaw, and exited somewhere near the eye.
On scenes of crime, crimes of passion, people killed by the ones they love the most. In August 1967, the playwright Joe Orton was battered to death in this tiny bedsit in Knowle Road, Islington. He was murdered by his lover, Kenneth Halliwell, who then took his own life. One of England's most brilliant theatrical hopes for the future was lost forever. The 1960s was a time of great social and sexual revolution, and London was very much the place to be. Amidst this new sexual freedom, Joe Orton took full advantage of the active gay scene. Islington is now one of London's most sought-after addresses, but in the 1960s it was working class. Eleanor and Aldo Salvoni have lived in Knowle Road since the 1930s. They were Joe and Ken's next-door neighbours. Eleanor revisits their bedsit for the first time.
Now, this is where Ken and Joe lived. Oh, it has changed a lot. Yeah. Oh dear, strange feeling. Really strange feeling. Yeah. Well, coming into this room after all these years, but always knowing what had happened, and coming into this room now, I can still see them, you know, sitting in my living room, having a chat and telling us all about whatever's going on. Yeah. But it really feels strange. But in a nice way, not in a scary way.
More than 30 years on, Eleanor still remembers that night.
Coming home at night, that night, it was 2 o'clock in the morning when I looked up at the window, at my own window, to see if everybody was in bed, and I saw a light in theirs, and I thought, this is strange, this is very strange. There's never a light at 2 o'clock in the morning. And the next morning, my husband said Joe was going to come and see me, and when I came down the road, there's the press and the police and the cameras. I thought, oh, wonderful, wonderful, he's had a hit. And my husband waiting on the doorstep, and I said, Aldo, he's had a hit. And Aldo said, no, Eleanor, he has had a hit. They're both dead.
Peter Powell was an actor friend of Joe and Ken. Now a tour guide around literary Islington, he still drinks in the same pub.
Joe Orton and Ken Halliwell lived together in a partnership, which, of course, was really a marriage. I mean, despite the fact that one reads about Joe's affairs, the amazing thing is that he always came back.
Joe and Ken had been inseparable since meeting at drama school 15 years earlier. But their relationship had to be discreet. In the mid-60s, homosexuality was still illegal.
Gay men were effeminate. But Joe sort of said, you don't have to do that, you don't have to be like that. You can just be a man who prefers men and still retain your maleness. You don't have to be a queen. And I think it says a lot about Joe as a person. It's saying, you know, again, I'm going to be true to myself. I'm a man who prefers men.
Kenneth Halliwell was a more complex character. He nurtured Joe, his younger protege, and had great plans for a successful future together.
Kenneth was a classical scholar, knew his Latin, knew his Greek, knew his theatre, knew about English culture. And Joe must have seen Kenneth as this extremely sophisticated man.
I used to hear them because it was in the same level as my bedroom, and I could hear the typewriter going and one of them singing, and I never knew which one. He used to sing pieces of opera, and I would say, I must ask him, who's the one who sings the opera? And I never could, always forgot, always must ask them, must I? But I never did find out who was the opera singer.
Joe kept a diary of his and Ken's exploits and escapades. In the early 60s, they began on a mischievous mission, altering the fly-leaves and titles of library books and tearing out the colour pictures to decorate their flat.
And the walls, which I couldn't believe, were covered absolutely with all these with cutouts, whatever they may be. And I said, my God, what have you done? But they just laughed, not realising what they've been doing, defacing the library books and putting all these things up there.
I think for them it was a bit of a hoot, really. I mean, even the librarian at the time at Islington said that in some ways we really looked forward to reading, you know, their blurbs on the inside cover, because they were very funny. But then he sort of quickly sort of redressed it by saying, but on the other hand, it was an attack on our stock.
They were arrested for defacing library books and sent to prison for 6 months, separately. It was the first time they'd ever been apart, and they reacted very differently. While Joe thrived, Kenneth suffered and became more and more disturbed.
I think prison was the turning point in their lives. Ken had a thoroughly miserable time in prison. He was knocked about. He was more obviously camp, more obviously gay than he was also completely bald, and he had a wig, which was a very ill-fitting wig. So he suffered quite badly at people's hands, and by the time he came out, he was broken. For Joe, it hardly affected him at all. In fact, I remember saying to him, Joe, what was it like in prison? He said, can you imagine, dear, being sort of locked up with 200 men?
On leaving prison, Joe's writing went from strength to strength. The BBC accepted his first one-act play, and huge success followed with entertaining Mr. Sloane, Lute, and What the Butler Saw. Joe had finally hit the big time, on his own.
He wrote me a letter saying, I'm meeting the Beatles. Which I thought, wow, my brother's meeting the Beatles. And their manager, he said, and he shook hands, I think, with Paul McCartney. And Paul McCartney said, well, hello, Joe. He said, so you're a playwright? So Joe said, yes, I am. So he said, well, the only thing I got from the theatre was a sore arse.
As Joe's fame grew, Ken felt more isolated, and his health got worse. He couldn't cope with Joe's increasingly open promiscuity. Joe wrote about his sexual adventures in his diary, which he often left lying around for all to see.
See, Ken was always open, full of bubble, full of happiness and laughter. Then suddenly he started in with dark glasses. And that's when I thought, well, there's something wrong, you know, wearing dark glasses all the time. And I think he was beginning to, he wasn't very well.
In June 1967, Joe and Ken took a trip to Tangiers. In a diary entry, Joe records Ken's frantic state. The signs were all there, but Joe just didn't seem to notice.
Kenneth became violently angry shortly after this and attacked me, hitting me about the head and knocking my pen. He left the room. Lying on his bed in a towel dressing gown looking tight-lipped, I realised that it was no good speaking to him. The sore would come sooner or later.
On the morning of August the 9th, back in London, Joe was due to meet with Brian Epstein, the manager of the Beatles, to discuss writing a film script for them. it didn't get much better than this.
He came in the morning, Epstein's chauffeur. He didn't come, the chauffeur came. And he went upstairs, knocked on the door. There was no answer, so he opened up the letterbox and he saw a body on the floor, or a head or something was on the floor.
It was Ken.
And when he saw the body, he said, "You better call the police." And the police came, and they went upstairs, and that was it.
Ken beat Joe violently with a hammer as he lay in bed. Then took an overdose of sleeping pills. Ironically, Ken died before Joe slowly bled to death. He left a note saying that Joe's diary would explain all.
I think he was afraid that he was losing Joe. I'm sure he was. And I think
I don't think Joe would have left
I
him.
think eventually.
I don't think so.
I don't
He
think
may have made him suffer a bit, but I don't think he would have left him.
I think Ken eventually flipped him.
He must have had this fear, but I don't think he would have
I
done.
think he had this fear of
Yeah.
losing Joe.
And I feel that the crime stems not really from a great jealousy on Kenneth's part. I think it has more to do with the fact that Kenneth was very ill. Whether you can blame Joe for that illness, not being attentive enough to the relationship, I don't know.
Tellingly, Joe's diary ends mid-sentence a week before he was murdered. Perhaps his missing entries could have given us some clues as to what drove Kenneth that night, but we'll never know. Their ashes are scattered together in Golders Green Crematorium, just as Ken would have wanted it. The idyllic Suffolk village of Polstead seems an unlikely place for a crime of passion. But in 1828, William Corder became the village's most infamous resident. He was hanged for a crime which shocked the country. William Corder was the only surviving son of a tenant farmer. He had to marry to ensure the family's future. Tragedy had already struck the Corder family. William's brother Thomas died trying to cross the frozen village pond. His father and 2 other brothers died soon after. This is the death mask of William Corder, taken from a plaster cast shortly after he was hanged. The story of the Red Barn murder and its grisly relics can be found in a small museum in Bury St Edmunds, Suffolk. Chris Mycock is the curator.
I think he liked a good life. He often disappeared down to London, and he was a bit of a spendthrift. He mixed with, shall we say, the low life, and one of them was heard to say of William that he would hang one of these days.
Stuart Evans is an authority on famous murders.
He wasn't a particularly good catch from the looks angle, because he was snub-nosed, short-sighted, not very tall, and one would hardly describe him as extremely attractive. William Corder was a tenant farmer in Polstead. The Red Barn was situated on his farmland, and he formed an association with the girl Marten, who was actually about 5 years older than him.
Maria lived with her father and stepmother in this cottage less than a mile from William Corder's farm.
Well, Maria Marten was very much a local girl, a Polstead girl. She lived with her mother and father in the village, the cottage which you can still see today. They were quite a poor family. He was merely a farm labourer and mole catcher.
She could write, she could read, which for a village girl of low status was probably quite an achievement. When she got to about 16 or 17, she went off the rails a little bit. She started having affairs. She was quite attractive.
I suppose for her day she was fairly promiscuous. She had 3 illegitimate babies.
Maria had a child by William's brother, which died. Another by the local squire. The workhouse was the usual fate of an unmarried mother, but Squire Matthews saved Maria from the workhouse by sending her a £5 note every quarter.
Mr. Matthews didn't marry her either. So then she turned to another most likely catch, William. And they had, should we say, a relationship for about 18 months.
Maria became pregnant again, this time by William, but the child didn't survive. Maria's family were determined that William should marry Maria and provide for her.
So it wasn't really a desirable state of affairs, but it seems as though she weathered these three pregnancies and didn't really come unstuck until she met William Corder.
William's reputation for dishonesty was well known. He stole one of Maria's £5 notes by opening her post. At the time, he could have been hanged for that, had Maria ever told anyone. Something she never let him forget.
It just shows how dishonest Corder could be.
The Marten family pressed Corder to marry the girl. They still wanted him to marry her. Corder said that he would marry the girl and stand by her, and to that end they arranged to meet in the Red Barn and go off to Ipswich and get married. At least that was the story that Corder gave.
He didn't really want to marry her, but in the end she pressed him. He agreed, said, "Come to the Red Barn. You have to dress as a man so people don't know that we're going off together. We'll go to Ipswich. We'll get a special license and I'll marry you." She was never seen alive again.
The Red Barn is no longer there. But when Maria set off on what would be her last journey, it was just a short walk to the barn.
Which lay at an angle here across the fields. Corder was waiting there to meet her, allegedly with a gig to take her to Ipswich, where they were going to be married.
They met there on more than one occasion. They probably, we say, enjoyed intimacies there on more than one occasion. It seems to have featured quite largely in their relationship.
Maria set out at sunset with a short walk to meet William. No one knows what time she died, but what happened next was a matter for the court.
In the Red Barn, he claims that an argument arose about the £5 yet again, that Maria got a little bit more upset than usual, that she grabbed one of his pistols, which she knew he kept. He often kept his pistols loaded. She threatened to shoot herself. In the struggle which ensued as he was trying to wrest the pistol off her, it went off and she died.
The bullet would have entered the jaw, just below the jaw, and exited somewhere near the eye.
He digs a hole in the barn floor, buries Maria.
I think probably the main reason for the murder was that Corder had this argument with her. Whether it was a spur-of-the-moment thing or a premeditated thing is unclear. But I think he feared that she would expose him for stealing the £5 which she'd received in one of the letters from Matthews. And at that time that was a capital offence. That would be hanging over his head, and if the girl could prove it, then he would be executed for that offence.
But William would be executed anyway. Not for stealing the Royal Mail, but for murder. William returned to Polstead several times. He said that Maria had gone away. She was well and happy, he said, and made excuses for her not writing. But by Christmas, her family were worried.
And then the stepmother starts getting dreams. She sees Maria being murdered in the Red Barn. So she nudged her old man, told him to go dig in the Red Barn. So he went with his mole spud, prodded in the bottom of the Red Barn and found a soft piece of earth. Then he sent for the village constable. They finished digging the hole and they found Maria's remains.
William fled to London. Having escaped one marriage, he then set about finding another wife.
Well, in London, Corder had placed an advertisement in two newspapers, the Morning Herald and the Sunday Times, for a wife.
By a marvellous piece of detective work, one of the local constables went down to London and with the aid of a London constable found Corder married and running a girls' school in Brentwood Road, Ealing.
Corder was arrested and brought back to Bury St Edmunds to answer for his crime. Bury St Edmunds was the county town of Suffolk and had a new jail. William was taken there, tried and sentenced to death. The case was a national sensation. Thousands of people turned out to see William hang from a gallows outside the governor's house.
And the mass crowds of some 15,000 people all gathered in the fields there and witnessed the execution of William Corder.
It was common practice then for the bodies of hanged men to be used for medical science. William was well aware of the indignities he would endure after his death.
Public executions were, at the time, almost entertainment. Everybody wanted to see the end of this absolutely vile murderer.
The case of the Red Barn murder was serialized in newspapers and eventually made into a melodrama. But some of the most memorable artifacts are still kept in a museum in Bury St Edmunds.
This is William Corder's scalp, with his right ear still attached, and you can actually see the stubble of his hair. This delightful leather-bound volume is actually bound in William Corder's skin, and if we open it up, we can see inside a bookmark for the Bury St Edmunds Athenaeum Institute Museum originally was housed there, and you can see here it says, "The binding of this book is the skin of the murderer William Corder, taken from his body, tanned by myself in the year 1828.
Today, the village of Polstead is still haunted by the events of 1828. Corder himself has a strange kind of immortality. His legend lives on, in the village and in the house that bears his name.
And we'll revisit more scenes of crime next Thursday at 8. Next tonight, Primetime Crime continues with arrest and trial, details of which are seconds away.